Come on. Yeah. Break down, come on.
Welcome back once again to another episode of 30 Minutes of Life. I am Ryan Anderson, and joining me to my left, as always, is the Skype man. Hype man.
Brad Learman.
What's up, man?
Hey, man. Hey, a quick note.
Of course.
You know that little side project I was telling you about?
Oh,
I actually
yeah.
figured out how to actually do it.
Oh.
So,
Ooh.
I think you've probably told the listeners already, but whenever we upload our podcasts, they automatically go to our YouTube channel. It's the Nerd Rage Podcast on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
It's just audio. There's no video or anything, but I'm working on maybe spicing it up just a little bit.
A little video component for the fans?
Screen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I love it. So that's a little tidbit for those of you who don't normally listen to Nerd Rage, like Nerd Rage Weekly there. So that's cool, man. I can't wait to see what you've got cooking. What you've shown so far on Instagram was already a nice little treat, so I can't wait to see the rest of it. But yeah, so what we're doing for 30 Minutes of Life this week, our topic of conversation is really just about internet outrage and what's been going on, especially in the kind of Twitter sphere. So as we like to do, this is just a 30-minute conversation talking about just one big topic of the week. And Brad and I just want to go over what's been going on with all this stuff on Twitter lately. So in terms of all this internet toxicity, especially on Twitter, what's the one that really stands out to you the most, Brad?
Oh, well, as of recently, it's the firing of James Gunn over a lot of tweets that he made kind of, I guess, earlier in his directorial career.
Right.
A lot of it was, I would assume it was joking, making a lot of really crude jokes, but it was about, pedophilia-ish related stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So, a lot of comics, or not even just comics, like some people that just find themselves to be, good sense of humor or comedians and whatnot, will often try to go to, like, topics that are, risque,
Oh, yeah.
But I think as a society, we kind of don't tolerate jokes about that kind of stuff.
Well, and see, that's where
it
gets to be very interesting, especially with James, because we've seen so many. We've seen Roseanne, we've seen Chris Hardwick. You could even dip into some of the things with like the Snyder Cut that, and all the controversy that goes around all that. He didn't get necessarily fired for Twitter comments or anything like that, but the world in which we revolve around Twitter is very interesting because it can almost make and break careers these days. Social media is no joke by any means. Just because you're on a platform where your face is invisible, it doesn't mean that you're not a representative. And I think we'll talk about that more towards the end of this conversation. But what's most interesting about the Chris Hardwick thing, the James Gunn thing, is that James Gunn, we just found out today, despite the fact that his entire cast and crew penned this beautifully written letter, how much they support him and don't blame him for things that were done in the past, Disney came out today and said, no, they're standing by their decision. Could this decision ultimately get overturned in time? It's possible, but I jokingly said on our Twitter page that the big bad mouse is, when he puts his foot down, it's pretty firm. So, yeah, go ahead.
I think I hate to say it, but I think Disney's move is the correct one. If you look back at Roseanne Barr's little Twitter fiasco about the jokes that she made, she got removed from her show effective immediately.
Oh yeah,
and was never even considered to even come back to the the negotiating table.
Yeah, they didn't give it a second chance at all. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, hell no. So I think, as much as it does suck, I think at least there's some sort of, no hypocrisy on Disney's part.
No, yeah,
and saying she made some really some distasteful jokes, big deal. But I mean, I don't know. The content of James Gunn's tweets were, pretty bad. And even though if they were like 10 years ago, and that's still, it's social media. It's
right.
basically public record.
Exactly. So, in talking about this, like I know a lot of people will say, to bring up Roseanne, like the fact that her comments were different from James Gunn's, but I think why I'm weirdly enough kind of standing by what ABC has done is or ABC, Disney and all that, is the fact that it's kind of a no tolerance policy. Like if you go into your job and you do something that is distasteful or it is against the rules, whether it's stealing or it's like a fashion code thing, whether or not, those things are different from each other. If it's a no tolerance policy zone, the company looks at it as, how does this individual represent us? Now, ethically speaking, I believe everyone should get second chances. I don't really like the idea of necessarily giving one to Roseanne after what she said, but at the same time, I still believe if someone is truly repentant, then yes, I would definitely at least give them that second chance to atone for their mistakes. But we're in a situation where, again, these guys are representatives of their product. And if that product is ultimately, or the bigger brand of that product is tarnished because of this person's comments, whether it be present day, past, whatever, and they're brought to light, it's like, in a sense, the idea that you take someone who may have had like pedophilic tendencies when they were younger or whatever, and had those sorts of desires, but they're like, I've redeemed now. If that's made public and there's no chance for that person to atone for that, I think that ultimately at the end of the day, you have to look at that in the optics of it all. I mean, it's a word that's used, especially in the industry all the time, is the optics of it, the way it's viewed by, the mass consensus. And while I think, the Roseanne thing was a very weird thing and it was focused on her specifically for one comment, but she's had a great deal before that. James Gunn's was very different in the sense that his was 10 years ago, and it was this kind of tricky thing because you could argue, yes, it was a joke, and he made a lot of consistent jokes in that realm. But again, how does that look from the company's perspective? And I can't necessarily say I would have made the exact same decision, but I can't argue with them for the fact that they did the thing that they did, because even though there was a person intentionally going out of his way to try and attack James Gunn because he had his particular motive for getting him in trouble, the reality is it was brought to light. And I think the smart thing that's been done now, although, again, an argument could be made against this as well, is the fact that a lot of big public personalities and all that stuff who have Twitter or Facebook or any of these social media platforms are going back and deleting these old comments that could be taken out of context, because again, we live in a very, kind of sensitive society that's very, reactionary. They're ready to jump on whatever the newest thing that everyone's buzzing about. And if that happens to be James Gunn's tweets or, Chris Hardwick's situation or whatever Roseanne is currently saying, they're going to say it. Whether it's a joke or not, someone's going to have a reaction to it. And I think the sad fact is we have to learn from this and find better ways to present ourselves, especially in this media sphere that we're in. Like, same thing goes for us. Like, I've made weird jokes, but I've always taken that half second and gone, is this going to piss off somebody? And a lot of the times I'm very middle of the road. And I think you know this about me. I think you are too. I mean, you would put yourself kind of in the middle. You're not very like, it's this, and this.
Oh, I'm
end
not
of story.
Go full David Stern or anything.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, like, do you take a particular side, or do you find yourself in the middle, as I kind of just described?
I don't know.
Because I don't think there's a right answer, truthfully.
I mean, first off, my social media presence is very minimal. So
this is true.
I don't have Twitter. I don't use it. It doesn't really bother me that I don't have it.
Right. And I think a lot of people have kind of caught on to the fact that I'm usually the one operating the Twitter account too.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Exactly. I know. I honestly, I take into account everything that's available. You know, go off of the intuition that I have and deduce, logical and reasonable sounds, like conclusions based on that stuff.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So what do you make of like the Chris Hardwick thing, for example? Do you feel any differently in that as opposed to the other two we just mentioned?
I don't know. You could go into the whole argument of it was another incident of like the Me Too movement. Although the one big thing that stuck out to me, or two things, is that number one, when she posted her whole, I want to say confession, but whole like account of the whole relationship that she had with this one guy.
Right.
She kind of she wrote it anonymously.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody was like, oh, that's definitely Chris Hardwick. And then, she played this like, oh, I didn't really mean it to blow up this big kind of thing.
Right.
So it was a little hypocritical on her part. And then two, she didn't participate in the investigation that AMC held. Right. Which was very strange, in my opinion.
I hadn't heard that part. So she opted not to be in the investigation part of it?
Yep, she opted not to be a part of it.
Okay, very interesting. Now
they asked her to participate, and she chose not to.
Now, see, here's the thing that's very interesting to me about today's society is it's not, and again, we realize that we're both two white males, and our perspective might be very different from someone of a different walk of life, and we try and be as understanding of everyone, even though we don't walk in everyone's shoes, and we understand that. At the same time, though, I find this particular situation, as well as I was just reading up today about the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard situation and how chaotic their experience had been and how that was all over social media for such a time there. And actually, I read more into that today because I was on the impression of, okay, Johnny Depp is a scumbag. And I had kind of done the same thing with Chris Hardwick as a result of what I had heard and what I'd read. And traditionally, I will always, and I've told this to Amanda as well, I was like, I will always side with the victim if a report ever comes out. But, I'm always still leaning on that fence if I ever hear a report that contradicts that gives further evidence that, hey, not everything you hear right up front is always the truth. I mean, we hear that with news all the time too. We hear, oh, this movie's coming out and it's going to have this and this and this and this and this. And then it comes out, it's like, well, it had one of those things, but here's the real story. And then there's more to it. And again, I don't know, and Brad doesn't know because we weren't there. We were not in the room. We didn't see these things happen. But some of the things that I found very interesting that have come out since that time with both of these stories is that Amber Heard apparently was in a relationship with a female partner back years ago, and that female partner had reported some violence back then as well. And I was very taken back by that. I was like, I had no idea that she had any sort of previous history of being violent. And there was all this, someone had literally bullet pointed like questionable activity on her part with relationships she had been in. And I thought that was very interesting. So, and then there was an image of her smacking Johnny from the back of the head. And it was supposed to be kind of like a playful, oh, we're in a relationship and you drive me crazy thing. But they said if you read the body language here, that Johnny is actually doing the kind of thing that someone who's been essentially emasculated in their relationship for whatever reason has been doing. So, I mean, again, that could just be reading too much into it, especially with that last part. But, it paints a broader picture than just, oh, it's one person, it's this story, it's this. It adds more scope to it. And, again, we were not there. We couldn't tell. Same thing with Chris Hardwick and his situation. I genuinely think the way he presents himself that he comes across as a good guy. But as soon as I heard the report that Chloe was, wrote the letter that she did, the hard thing is that when you're the first person to come out and say something, people go, oh, this must be the thing. And you don't get that. And as soon as someone gives a retraction saying, oh, no, it's not, the first reaction we have is, oh, well, no, you're just trying to save face and you're trying to protect your brand and all that stuff. But that could also be someone being very shy. Like, you think about like even Bill Cosby, like all those women who took forever to come out against him. Like they should have said something years ago, and I understand why they took as long as they did. Some I wish that probably had come sooner than, taking all these years. But the fact that some people who are in these like abusive situations or are the victim themselves, sometimes they will take longer to get their story out, and that's what really makes all this suck, is the fact that we have this big open sphere that's a great place to communicate your message about things that are good and great, but then you also hear these terrible stories, but you don't have full context of what actually is going on. So it's really tricky. I mean, like, do you feel any differently about the Chris Hardwick thing or the Johnny Depp thing? Or, I mean, how are you on those?
Well, the other thing to note, though, is that a lot of, what was it, like a couple of other ex-girlfriends or current girlfriends actually came out and spoke in support of him.
Oh, so of Chris Hardwick?
I think that's important to note as well.
Yeah, because that was what really made that one so interesting to me, is because at first it was Chloe puts us out, and then there was a million people just like, oh, we support her, much like we were doing. And then all of a sudden it became, well, hold the phone there. Chris has something to say, and everyone's like, oh, Chris, you're terrible. And, well, I wasn't going to immediately vilify him, but I was of the mind that, okay, she was probably in the right here. And we were, again, staying with that messaging right there. But then it started to come out with people who were actually defending him. Like, I've known him for years. It's this, it's that, it's this, it's that. And then the text message started to come out. I mean, at first I was hesitant because it was TMZ breaking some of it, and TMZ I'm always kind of 50-50 on. Yeah. Well, I don't want to get all into TMZ, but yeah, just that whole thing still left me kind of shaky. But then these texts start to come out, and then it starts to go and filter back into the middle, and you're like, well, now I don't know who to believe. And it's very tricky because, again, we weren't there, which, the argument could be made, why comment on something if you're in the middle or nothing's conclusively proven. But I think with all of these, it's really about the optics of the situation. And, well, first thing, we really need to just, as a whole, need to be better people on the internet. Not everyone has a brand per se, but they have an identity. And if you're presenting yourself to a greater scope of people, I think you need to be taking that extra 2 seconds to go, hey, is this going to affect me down the road? I mean, think about if you had like a really nasty tweet, like you could have said something racist or homophobic or something like that years ago in your life. And then all of a sudden, because this tweet pops up, you could find yourself in the hot seat in your job or, in a future relationship or anything like that, because it could negatively affect you, much like these are doing right now to these celebrities. So, is there any other particular situations that come up through social media that stick in your mind or that you're interested in discussing?
Not specifically, just as a whole. I hate the idea that we put so much weight on, a Twitter account. I think we have better things to worry about, to occupy our time with.
Yeah.
140 characters is not important enough to get all mad about.
I think it's 280 now, but again, I agree with you because yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. See,
yeah, they doubled it up, and then
there's evidence. I don't use Twitter.
Yeah, there you go. Brad's of the old guard in the Twitter sphere there. But yeah, no, it's tricky, or just tricky about the whole thing because, we were talking when we started this about even bringing up like the Snyder Cut too. Like, think about that as an overall platform to get a message out. Now, it becomes such a divisive thing because you put it out there for so many people to judge and cast their own vote and opinion on it. But it can go very one way or another depending on how you present that message. Like, the one thing that worries me is, like, I love the idea that someone is like, hey, there is actors, there are people behind the scenes, there's the director himself, there's even people involved in the studio. Like, when I ended up seeing Jay Oliva, who was storyboard artist for Justice League at Comic-Con, and he told me some stuff about the Snyder Cut that, I'll probably bring up on the next Nerd Rage Weekly episode, because I forgot to bring it up when we were talking about it on our last episode. But you talk about all this stuff so positively, like, hey, there's enough evidence here. If Warner Brothers really wanted to, they could put this particular cut out and there'd be a swelling of fans who would be all a part of it. The problem is there's also the volatile fan base. There's terms that are coined like quote unquote Snyder Bros, and people who are making the situation more toxic with their impassioned speeches and create this whole thing and shut down Disney and all of their stuff because Disney tried to sabotage us first, so we've got to shut them down. Yeah, it's all that kind of stuff because there are particular movements and theories and things that are built up by these individuals, not all, but a good swelling of them trying to say like, hey, we felt attacked first, so now it's our feeling that we need to go and attack Disney films because Disney's the one that essentially screwed us over. But that goes kind of into a conspiracy realm where you think everyone's out to get you and it's all that. And every once in a while, I felt that myself, and I felt very like enraged and like I wanted to see the Zack Snyder cut of what Justice League would have been. But at the end of the day, you have to realize if the studio's not going to do it, they're not going to do it. You put out a nice impassioned, hey, we want to see this, here's why. And if they don't respond, move on. Clearly the studio has, and I respect the people who want to keep pushing for a campaign and making Twitter their platform to speak their voice. But if it comes at a cost where there's negative actions resulting from it or volatile speak over the internet to the point where, these negative reactions towards actors and actresses. I think it was, we talked about Kelly Marie Tran from the Star Wars movies, who got so belittled that she just shut down all of her content and is off social media now. We found out that I think just in this last week or right around Comic-Con, after the Titans trailer dropped, that the actress Anna Diop, who is playing Starfire, got so much racist backlash, like, oh, you can't have her because she's African American, even though most of those fans don't realize that that's actually more accurate than half of the animated content has been. And I don't want to get too far down that well, but the fact that they're going off a very simplistic place and not understanding what the studio was coming from and just making it a completely racist issue, it shuts her down and it makes her want to shut down her social media presence entirely. Like, social media can be such a great tool for things to succeed and thrive and be a place of information. But at the same time, it can be super hurtful and damaging and, ruin lives. Did I tell you about what happened with the actor who did Jar Jar Binks? Yeah.
I'm well aware of that.
Yeah. The fact that, it brought him to, near suicidal tendencies there. So to me, really, to summarize all of this, it's just, we need to be better as people. I think we look at too many things on social media as, oh, it's this person versus that person. But at the end of the day, we're all people. And I think we need to judge things more so on an individual basis, looking at ourselves not through race, creed, ethnicity, all that stuff. We need to respect everybody as people. We need to think about our actions before we jump into these, heated conversations or let things escalate to a point where they become a problem. And just choose our words wisely so that, 10 years down the road, we don't have, oh, remember that one tweet you did and now you're in hot water, Any final thoughts before we kind of wrap this all up here?
Glad I don't have Twitter.
So you don't have it at all?
Nope.
I thought you did have at least an account. I thought you were just like Dylan and Christian and didn't. Okay.
I had one made like a decade ago, and I don't know the name or the password or anything for it.
Okay.
So.
Well, feel free to harass Brad on Instagram. Just kidding. What is your Instagram, by the way, just so that people can follow you on something social media?
Oh, it's ominous_drawer.
Yeah. Drawer like an artist drawer. I think that's just going to be it for this week. Again, simply put, let's just be better, everyone. I'm sure we'll have a more fun and less heated kind of conversation, or a depressing one, if you will. That'll be next week's episode. But just wanted to take these 30 minutes to talk about a topic that's been very heated on the internet and bring it to you guys. So what do you think? Let us know in the comments. I'm sure many people will have a lot to say about this. If you want to have a private conversation with us, you can always hit us up at nerdragepod@gmail.com. Ask us any questions you want. If you want to be on the show and you want to contribute your thoughts to something like this, please let us know, and we will definitely talk to you guys over email. Find us on Twitter, Facebook. We are on iHeartRadio, Spotify now, SoundCloud, nerdragepod.libsyn.com for all of our episodes. And give us a nice little rating there on iTunes, and we will try and let you guys know that we appreciate it. So for the Nerd Rage Podcast, I've been Ryan Anderson.
Now Brad Learman.
And we will see you guys again next week.
Yeah.